Welcome to Snail Story, where every tale unfolds slowly, but lingers deeply in the heart. Today, we invite you to follow a love story that didn't begin with emotions, but with a contract. A humble schoolteacher, forced into marriage to save her family. A wealthy businessman carrying an old wound he's never allowed to heal. This is a journey that moves from coldness to warmth, from guarded hearts to quiet trust, and, in the end, a choice to stay freely and for love. If you're looking for a story that's soft, tender, and healing, then this might just be the little gift meant for you. The town of Amalfi nestled itself between chalk-white cliffs and the shimmering Mediterranean Sea. There, the scent of sea salt and jasmine was always in the air, carried gently. On the breeze, Alessia Rossi, 27 years old, was born and raised in this seaside haven. She taught literature at Santa Lucia Elementary, quaint little limestone school that had aged gracefully over time. The very same place where she herself had once learned to read and dream. Alessia loved her job. She loved reading under the shade of lemon trees, loved the sparkle in her students' eyes whenever she told story tales of a lost prince in a labyrinth, or a girl with a heart that glowed in the dark. Her life was simple, serene, and then came that afternoon. The sun was scorching, and she had just finished her last lesson of the day. She was tidying up books in the tiny library when the door swung open. Her father, Alberto, stepped inside. His face was pale and weary, his eyes heavy with sorrow, and his steps uncertain, as if he'd been swept in by the sea wind. "Alessia, we need to talk." His voice was raspy, urgent. She let go of the copy of The Little Prince in her hands, her heart sinking with a weight she couldn't explain. "What is it, Papa?" Alberto lowered his head and sat on the wooden chair by the window, where sunlight streamed in and etched every wrinkle on his weathered face. "I invested in our old family winery. I believed I could bring back your grandfather's original recipe. But—" Alessia sat across from him, feeling as though she was about to hear something she didn't want to. "But it all failed," he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "I took out loans from the bank and some private sources. I couldn't repay them. And now, how much?" she asked directly, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "Almost 70,000 euros. Alessia clenched her hands together. That number was larger than she had imagined, nearly triple what she had managed to save in 6 years of teaching. "And what are you going to do?" "The main creditor wants to speak with you." "Me?" She frowned. "Why me?" "Because it's Leonardo Moretti." The name hung in the air, freezing the moment in its tracks. Leonardo Moretti, the chairman of Moretti Group. A man both wealthy and enigmatic, well known across southern Italy. The press dubbed him the Ice Prince, a cold magnate who acquired historical properties and transformed sleepy villages into luxury resorts. Rumor had it he once loved a woman who died tragically, and ever since he trusted no bonds, especially not love. "He knows who I am. It seems so. I mentioned you when explaining our situation, and he made an offer." Alessia swallowed hard. What kind of offer? Alberto couldn't meet her eyes. "He'll erase all the debt, even the bank's share, if you agree to sign a 6-month marriage contract." The air shattered around her. Alessia shot to her feet as if slapped across the face. "You're joking, right?" "I wish it were a joke." His voice broke. He was clear. This is a contract. No emotions, no long-term commitment. After 6 months, it's over. You walk away. But if you refuse, they'll seize the house. And Santa Lucia. It's already in Moretti Group's redevelopment plans. Alessia walked out of the room, her heart plunging into depths unknown. She couldn't tell what hurt more, watching her proud father beg a stranger, or realizing she was now a pawn in a game she never chose to play. That night, she sat by the sea, beneath a silver moon that cast its light upon the waves. In her hand was a short letter and invitation to Villa Moretti in Florence, where the contract would be signed. The letter had been delivered by Leonardo's personal assistant, a sharp-featured woman named Bianca, whose expression betrayed nothing. Alessia did not sleep. She spent hours writing, not to decline, but to search within herself for an answer to a single question. Can I live with this? Can I endure 6 months as a shadow beside a stranger who feels nothing? But then she thought of her father, the shuttered winery, of the children at Santa Lucia who might end up learning inside a shopping mall if the school was torn down at dawn. As the first light crept through her wooden window, Alessia packed a few simple dresses, a notebook, and the letter her mother had left behind before she died. Then she boarded the earliest bus out of Amalfi, carrying with her a heart that had never known love yet, was now preparing to sacrifice itself to save the things she cherished most. Florence unfolded like a watercolored painting rinsed in golden light. The red-tiled roofs stretched like velvet across a pale blue sky, while the Arno River wound silently through the ancient city. But to Alessia Rossi, it was all a blurry stream of images slipping past the car window. She sat in the back seat, gripping the strap of her handbag as if it were the only anchor holding her to reality. Beside her sat Bianca, Leonardo Moretti's assistant, a sharp-featured woman with neatly pinned black hair and an expression devoid of warmth. She didn't speak much, only glancing at her watch from time to time, as though measuring each second with surgical precision. Alessia Rossi. She finally spoke as the car crossed an old stone bridge. The contract will be signed this afternoon. Mr. Moretti doesn't like delays. Is he certain he wants me? Alessia asked, unable to keep the irony from her voice. I'm not beautiful. I'm not famous. I'm just a village schoolteacher. Bianca didn't turn. Leonardo Moretti doesn't choose people for the reasons ordinary men do. He chooses them for purpose. Alessia looked away, her eyes catching the small crucifix hanging from the rearview mirror. Her mind was a storm of wounded pride, quiet resentment, and the reluctant acceptance she had forced herself to carry throughout this journey. The car turned onto a cobbled road, flanked by ancient olive trees. At the end of the slope, Villa Moretti rose like a fortress, majestic, austere, utterly untouchable. Its ivory stone facade glared in the sunlight, and its tall windows seemed to watch every breath of its visitors. Alessia stepped out, her pale blue cotton dress fluttering in the wind. She felt small and misplaced in this world. No one came to greet her. There were no formalities, no flowers. Only Bianca, leading her into a vast study where Leonardo Moretti was waiting. He stood with his back to the window, sunlight casting sharp lines across his broad shoulders and straight spine. When he turned around, his gaze met Hearst gray eyes, cold and unreadable. Alessia Rossi, he said, voice deep and firm. I trust you understand the terms. Alessia nodded, holding his gaze. No love, no invasion of privacy, no expectations. 6 months. At the end, you are free. Your father's debts will be erased. The school will be spared. He slid a folder toward her. This is the contract. She sat, her fingers brushing against the fountain pen laid out before her. Her hands trembled as she turned each page. Every line felt like a chain slowly binding her life to his. You don't need to read it all if you're ready, he said. Alessia looked up, her eyes fierce. You know, I used to believe marriage was sacred. Now, I just hope I'm strong enough to survive this transaction. For the first time, something flickered on that stone-carved face. Surprise? Maybe? But it vanished as quickly as it came. You'll be fine. You seem tougher than I expected. She signed. Each stroke of ink felt like a cut through her pride. But she had made a promise to her father. And she had made her choice. The wedding will take place at 5 p.m. today, Bianca announced. There will be no media, no guests, just a legal procedure and the dress, Alessia asked. It's ready. They led her to a dressing room where the gown hung in waiting, simple ivory silk, with no lace, no embellishments. It didn't look like a wedding dress. It looked like a shroud for a woman who no longer felt. She dressed in silence. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see Alessia Rossi, the teacher who loved poetry. She saw a woman preparing to step into a marriage without love, without hope, without a future. The ceremony took place in a small marble room. A city official presided. Bianca stood silent as a statue beside them. Leonardo waited at the front, not in a tuxedo, but a silver gray suit. His face was carved in stone. Alessia walked slowly toward him, every step sinking her deeper into an invisible abyss. There was no music, no flowers, no blessings. When the official asked, Leonardo said, "I, Leonardo Moretti, do." Then it was her turn. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I, Alessia Rossi, do." He pressed a brief kiss to her forehead, touch colder than winter wind. Then he turned away, saying nothing. The wedding dinner was served in a vast, empty hall. Leonardo said nothing throughout the meal. Alessia sat across from him, forcing herself to swallow each bite like it was ice. When the last dish was cleared, he spoke simply. "From now on, you'll stay in the East Wing. We'll keep to the rules. No one invades the other space." Alessia nodded and rose from the table. As she walked toward her new room, she glanced out the window. The sun had disappeared behind the hills. Darkness was descending over Florence, just as it was over her heart. Alessia's room was in the East Wing of Villa Moretti, perfect place to hide a lost soul from the rest of the world. The space was elegant but cold, much like the man who owned the house. Gray limestone walls, thick curtains that blocked out every trace of sunlight, felt less like a home and more like a cloistered monastery. A retreat from life rather than the beginning of married one. No one knocked on her door in the morning. There was no breakfast tray waiting. She wandered into the kitchen at 7 a.m., where only a few quiet house staff moved silently through their tasks. An older woman, perhaps the housekeeper, approached and placed a cup of cappuccino and a slice of toast in front of her. "Alessia Rossi," she said gently. "Mr. Moretti instructed that you like your coffee in the morning. No sugar." Alessia blinked in surprise. "He knows what I like." "He knows everything he needs to know," the housekeeper replied. "Even that you write in your journal at night and enjoy classical music while reading." Alessia wasn't sure if she should feel cared for or surveilled. She took a sip of coffee, an unsettling feeling creeping into her chest. Leonardo Moretti, who had studied her so thoroughly, what exactly was his purpose? That afternoon, she wandered into the villa's library by chance. It was a vast space, with towering shelves stretching to the ceiling and sunlight glinting through a glass dome above. At the center stood an antique wooden table, and one leather chair had been pulled out as if someone had just left in haste. She reached for an old book, Divina Commedia. As she flipped through its pages, something slipped out. A paper, it was. A zoning diagram for the Villa Sol Resort project in Amalfi. Her eyes froze on a handwritten note in blue ink. Legal requirement, evidence of local humanitarian ties. Ideal, marriage to a native resident. Her fingers clenched. So this was the real reason he chose her. A legal placeholder to beautify an investment portfolio. A tactic to pacify the government while he swallowed up local land. Alessia slammed the book shut, her breath catching. A deep and personal offense twisted inside her. That evening, as she read in her room, a knock came at the door. It was Leonardo. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. Some of the usual frost was absent from his face, though the distance in his eyes remained as if he were speaking to a colleague. Not a wife. We need to clarify a few things, he said, standing at the doorway. Come in, she replied. I need a few answers myself. Leonardo stepped inside and sat across from her. He was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing his words. Alessia, he began. I didn't choose you out of emotion. I needed someone far enough from my world not to complicate it. Someone unattached, unlikely to interfere with my objectives. She nodded, her voice flat. And a local, to grease the wheels of your Amalfi investment. He paused. You found the note. Alessia didn't answer. She only looked at him, waiting for something. Leonardo leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed slightly. I was once engaged, Julia. We got engaged 3 years ago. One night, I was driving. She was beside me. We argued. I wasn't watching the road. The accident happened. Alessia's heart tightened. She died on the spot. I walked away with a few scratches. His voice was barely a whisper, as if confessing a sin no punishment could erase. Since then, I've stopped believing in marriage. I don't think I deserve a family. Alessia said nothing. She understood. Some people build their own prisons and lock themselves inside, punishing themselves for a crime no one else condemned. Leonardo was one of those people. I thought, he continued. If I turned marriage into a contracted transaction, I wouldn't make another mistake. Alessia nodded slowly. You want control. Because you're afraid. Afraid that if your heart breaks again, you won't be able to put it back together. For the first time, he looked at her like she had seen something he thought was buried too deep to reach. Yes, he admitted. And maybe I chose you because of the photo. You were looking at a child on the school playground. The way you smiled, it made me think hope might still exist. But I was too much of a coward to believe it fully. Alessia didn't know what to say. As Leonardo reached the door, he turned, speaking slowly. I didn't come here to fall in love with you, but if, in the next 6 months, I happen to feel something, I'll tell you. That's the only promise I can give. He left, the door closed behind him. Alessia sat in the dim room, motionless. She understood then he hadn't chosen her solely for a legal loophole. Somewhere within him, buried beneath layers of ice and silence, there still lived a piece of the man who once believed in light. And somehow, she had become that light. The days that followed passed as if someone had turned down the volume of life. No arguments, no conflict, just two people sharing a house. Distant, silent, occasionally nodding at each other with the courtesy of strangers on a train. Leonardo no longer appeared at meals. He seemed buried in back-to-back video conferences, silent departures for unannounced trips, and late-night returns, where the only proof of his arrival was the soft sound of tires rolling over the gravel outside the villa. Alessia filled the empty spaces with quiet tasks, her mornings spent tending the orange trees in the rear garden, afternoons lost in the library's endless shelves, and evenings writing fragments in her journal like stitching together memories she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. But deep down, she knew something had shifted since that night they spoke. Leonardo, the man who had once reduced marriage to a cold transaction, had admitted that she was, somehow, a flicker of light to him. Just a flicker. But real. One early morning, while organizing books, Alessia came across a narrow door at the far end of the second-floor hallway, a place she had never explored. There was no lock, no nameplate. Curiosity nudged her forward. She pushed it open. The room inside was strangely plain. A worn wooden desk, a low bookshelf, a faded leather armchair, and a window that opened out to a quiet valley. But what caught Alessia's eye was the picture frame. Face down on the desk, she approached it and gently turned it over. A blonde woman smiled from the photo, radiant and bright like the morning. The man beside her was Leonardo younger, unguarded, without the tailored suit or the hardened stare. His arm was wrapped around her waist like it was the only place in the world he ever wanted to be. Alessia set the frame back down, her heart heavy. She wasn't jealous not of someone who had passed, but what she felt was deeper, more piercing. Raw presence of a wound that had never been allowed to heal as she turned to leave. A small wooden box on the shelf caught her eye. She hesitated. Then, carefully, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The script was bold, but shaky, written in pain, not peace. Giulia. I don't know how to keep living without you. I argued with you. I drove angry. I was behind the wheel. I didn't stop when I should have. I destroyed everything. If I could trade my life to bring you back, I would. For not loving you the right way, and for continuing to live when I don't deserve to. Alessia held the letter. Her vision blurred with tears. She carefully returned everything to its place and stepped out, her chest aching. That night, she didn't read, she didn't write. She sat by the window. A dried sprig of lavender in her hand, the same kind her mother used to grow, in Amalfi, thought about the man who had lived in silent punishment for 3 long years, cloaked in guilt and isolation. The next morning, just after the sun crept above the olive groves, Alessia trimmed the remaining lavender from the garden and placed them in a small glass vase. She didn't leave a note, didn't ask to be seen. Quietly, she set the vase outside Leonardo's study door. A simple gesture, but a message unspoken. I've seen your pain. I don't judge it. I only wish to share a little light. She didn't expect a response. But that evening, returning to her room after dinner, she found a small box on her desk. Inside was a crisp biscotti biscuitant, a handwritten note. Thank you. That was all, but her heart trembled with a strange new rhythm. The following days passed. Quietly, they still didn't speak much, but the silence was no longer hollow. Sometimes Leonardo would pause when he passed her in the garden, offering a small nod. Once, without a word, he left a Greek philosophy book on the tea table, just the kind she had once mentioned in passing. One late evening, as she read Zorba the Greek in the library, Leonardo entered. No announcement, no invitation. He sat in. The chair across from her opened his laptop and began typing softly. No words were exchanged. But Alessia felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, that the presence of a man didn't have to feel threatening. It could feel still, as though they were learning to breathe in the same rhythm. And somewhere deep inside her, something cracked not. A painful break, but a quiet opening. A crack where the light could slip in. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. She knew her heart was no longer obeying the invisible rule written in their contract. But for the first time since arriving at Villa Moretti, Alessia no longer wanted to run. On a golden Friday afternoon, the skies over Florence had turned the color of honey. Alessia was trimming the hydrangeas when a knock came at her door. It was Bianca, composed, as always, precise, as if her breath had been trained not to waste a single beat. Mr. Moretti would like you to accompany him to tonight's charity gala, she said, placing a silver box on the table. Here's the evening gown. I'll be back to help you get ready at 6. Alessia froze. Gala, but I wasn't told anything. Bianca shrugged. He said, tonight, she should be there. And just like that, she was gone. Alessia opened the box. Inside was an ivory gown, impeccably tailored, smooth silk hugging the figure before cascading into a quiet sweep at the hem. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious, but elegant in the kind of way that whispered rather than shouted, as though chosen. For someone who didn't like to be seen but couldn't be ignored. She didn't know why Leonardo wanted her there. But part of her didn't want to refuse, not because of the contract. but because of something else she wasn't ready to name. The gala was held in a historic hotel on the banks of the Arno, the golden lights casting shadows against marble pillars and glimmering glass domes. When Alessia stepped out of the car, Leonardo was already waiting. He wore a black tuxedo, the collar slightly open, his hair swept back with just enough imperfection to make him look like a model stepped out of an Italian editorial. When their eyes met, he paused a second too long, but enough for her to notice. "You fit this place," he said, his voice uneven. "Ready?" She nodded, barely trusting her own voice. They walked into the grand hall, side by side. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, not possessive, not demanding, just enough for others to understand. She is with him. The room was a sea of power politicians, tycoons, media elites. Alessia knew no one. But she stood tall, wearing a polite smile, determined not to let the tremor in her chest show. Leonardo introduced her simply. "My wife." No embellishment, no pretense. Suddenly, a woman approached. Red hair, a tight black dress, perfume strong enough to leave a trail in her wake. Her light gray eyes swept across Alessia like a knife. "Leonardo." "Long time," she purred. "And this is your new wife." "Quite the surprise. I remember you preferred women with a little more fashion sense." Alessia smiled, voice light as air. "I was surprised to learn your ex still lingers in places she wasn't invited." Silence fell. The woman's smile faltered, lips tightening before she turned on her heel, heels clicking sharply on the stone floor. Leonardo turned to Alessia, a glimmer of astonishment in his eyes. Then for the first time he laughed, not loud, but real. "I didn't think you had that kind of fight in you." Alessia shrugged. "You put me in the arena. I only did what I had to do to survive." Music began to play. A classic waltz floated through the hall. Leonardo extended his hand. "Shall we?" "You dance." She raised an eyebrow. "Julia taught me," he said, not hiding from the truth. Alessia looked into his eyes and guarded for once, raw with honesty. She placed her hand in his, and they stepped onto the dance floor. He led with certainty. She followed with grace. No words were spoken. But in the rhythm of their steps, the gentle pressure at her waist, the fleeting glances as they turned, there was an entire conversation without sound. "Aren't you afraid of anything?" he asked in a low voice. "I'm only afraid of things that matter," she replied, eyes fixed on their reflection in the mirror-lined walls. He looked at her for a moment longer, and then, as if something inside him gave way, he pulled her just slightly closer. When the music ended, they stood still, hands not yet released. On the drive back, the car rolled through quiet streets, city lights casting fleeting glows across the windows. Alessia sat silently, but inside, her thoughts spun like wind in a storm. Suddenly, Leonardo pulled over. Outside, a soft rain had begun to fall, light as mist. "Alessia," he said. Turning toward her, she turned to face him, just as he leaned in. The kiss came without warning, scheduled, uninvited but not false. It was the kiss of a man still lost, still aching, but who had just found the edge of a light he thought was gone forever. When he pulled away, both of them were breathless. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I didn't mean to." Alessia looked at him, her heart tightening. "Don't apologize," she whispered. "Just don't do it unless it's real." Leonardo didn't reply, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel as though he were holding himself back from falling into a place he once swore he'd never return to: love. Alessia sat quietly the rest of the way. Her heart, once locked behind the lines of a contract, was now fractured open by a kiss. Clumsy, uninvited, but real, she knew. From that moment on, everything had changed. After that kiss in the rain, Time neither sped up nor slowed down but for Alessia. Nothing felt the same. The next morning, the sunlight still poured through the windows, warming the pale wood floors. But the peppermint tea she brewed tasted blander, like her own breath, shallow, hesitant. Once again, her heart retreated into the iron cage she had forged the moment she stepped foot into Villa Moretti. She was afraid, not of Leonardo, but of herself, afraid that her feelings were real, but wouldn't be returned in full. Afraid that the kiss, whether spontaneous or sincere, was just a fleeting misstep in a 6-month contract they both had signed. From that day on, Alessia began to pull away. She no longer waited for him at dinner. No more tea and biscuits left in the library like before. If Leonardo entered a room, she would quietly exit. It wasn't anger, it was self-preservation. The walls she built weren't cold like his had once been. But they were distant, soft, silent, and deliberate. Leonardo noticed. He said nothing. But his gaze lingered longer as she passed by. At dinner, he still showed up not to talk, but to be present. One time, when she coughed softly in the garden, she found a bottle of honey ginger syrup on the kitchen table the next morning. No note, no explanation, just there. Like him on the third evening after the gala, Alessia sat in the library, her copy of Anna Karenina half open on her lap. She hadn't read a single line. Her eyes kept drifting toward the shelves, the very corner where Leonardo used to work a few weeks ago. She closed her eyes. The kiss returned vividly, the scent of rain, the faint cologne on his skin, the warm pressure of his hand behind her neck. And then the flicker of regret in his eyes when he pulled away. Was there anything more painful than a kiss someone felt compelled to apologize for? The next morning, it rained lightly. Alessia didn't go to the garden. Instead, she stayed in the kitchen, preparing hazelnut cookies, the only thing she could focus on, as she slid the tray into the oven. A sound startled her. "What are you doing?" Leonardo's voice wasn't loud, but it made her flinch. She didn't turn around. "Cookies," she answered quietly. "I can't write, I can't read, so I bake." He stepped closer. "You've been avoiding me for 3 days?" She stiffened. Still, she didn't face him. "I just needed air. And I'm what?" "Oxygen." His tone wasn't cutting. But there was something in it, something like hurt. Alessia placed the tray on the table and turned around. "I don't know what that kiss meant to you, Leonardo, but I don't want to misunderstand. I don't want to be the one imagining things." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "I'm not sure either, but I know I didn't kiss you out of obligation." Her throat tightened. "But you didn't kiss me out of love either," she replied, steady but quiet. "And I can't keep walking forward if I'm the only one moving." The room was heavy with silence. Outside, the rain tapped rhythmically on the glass roof. Leonardo didn't deny it. He only said, "I'm not used to living by emotion, and I don't know what to do with what's starting to surface inside me." That sentence, though not a declaration of love, hurt her more than a rejection, because it was honest. And honesty sometimes is helplessness dressed as truth. After that, Alessia withdrew completely. She adjusted her schedule to avoid him. If he dined at 7, she ate at 6. If he frequented the library at 10, she went in at 8. The small gifts he left, sprigs of lavender, old books, she still accepted, but never acknowledged. She spoke when necessary, but her voice had become that of a stranger, polite, appropriate, distant. Leonardo didn't fight it. He didn't confront her or demand an explanation, but she could feel him trying. One day, she left her coat out on the garden bench. The next morning, it was washed, folded, and hanging neatly by the door. Another time, she fell asleep reading on the couch. When she woke, a blanket covered her shoulders and a steaming cup of tea waited beside her. He said nothing, but he was still there, One late afternoon, as the wind turned dry and the olive trees began to rust, Alessia stood by her bedroom window, staring out across the fields. Of the 6 months promised, only 2 remained. She had stepped back out of fear. But what hurt more than that fear was the persistent thought in her mind. What if, when the 6 months end, I walk away and he never opens his heart? What will be left? A kiss in the rain and a promise that was never spoken. She gripped the curtain. Tightly no. She couldn't let everything fade into gray like this. She needed to know. She needed an answer. Not because she demanded love, but because she had already fallen. Autumn had arrived in Tuscany, painting the vineyards with shades of bronze. The morning air had turned crisp, and every breeze carried the earthy scent of damp soil. Inside the Moretti estate, time moved, slower, quiet, patient, men thick with unspoken things. Alessia Rosia, new name, an old self, stood on the bedroom balcony, hands wrapped around a cup of ginger tea, her gaze drifting toward the ash-gray sky in the distance. The 6-month contract that once felt endless now had fewer than 2 months left, and her heart no longer belonged to someone watching from the sidelines. Each quiet gesture, every deliberate silence, the times Leonardo knocked on her door only to leave again without a word, those had drawn her into something she had once sworn to resist, loving a man who could not promise anything. That morning, a small box appeared on the breakfast table. No name, no card, but Alessia knew who had placed it there. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, its pendant a finely carved lavender-bloomed a flower she had loved since childhood. She stared at the gift, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the pendant. It wasn't some extravagant piece of jewelry, nothing like the kind a wealthy man might throw at a contractual wife. It was chosen carefully, symbolically, thoughtfully, as if Leonardo had been watching her all this time, and that terrified her. She feared that if she allowed herself to believe, if she dared to hope, she would once again be the one sitting alone, waiting for a promise that would never be spoken. That evening she waited for Leonardo in the sitting room, her hair loose around her shoulders, golden under the soft amber glow of the lamps. She didn't wear the necklace. Her face was calm, but her heart was not. When the door opened, he stepped in his dark coat speckled with rain, his face tired. He paused when he saw her. "Is something wrong?" he asked, setting his keys down. "I need to talk to you," she said. It was the first time she had called him in the informal not because of the contract, but because that distance had long since dissolved. He nodded, removed his coat, and sat across from her. Alessia reached into her pocket, pulling out the necklace and placing it gently on the table. "Leonardo," she began, "the things you do, the gifts, the quiet gestures, they leave me confused." I tried to pull away. I tried to close myself off because I know what happens when I let my heart go too far. He didn't interrupt. He simply looked at her, and the gray of his eyes, once cold now, held a softer hue. "But no matter how much I tried," he said, voice like wind, "I still fell for you. Not because you're wealthy, not because you're kind, but because you're real. You're hurting, you're afraid. And yet, you show up every day." She paused, fingers gently twisting together. "I don't need you to love me back, Leonardo. But I need to know everything you've done. Is it real, or is it just your way of making the 6 months go by more gently?" Silence. Leonardo looked down, his hand resting on the pendant. "I once thought this contract was a way to stay in control. No feelings, no pain. But you broke every wall I built by never forcing me." He lifted his gaze, and she saw something in his eyes deeper than anything she had seen before. "I'm not good at soft words, but every time you left the room when I walked in, I felt something missing. Every morning you weren't at the table, the house felt hollow." He clenched his hand slightly. I don't know what love is supposed to look like anymore, Alessia. But if love means wanting to see your smile in the morning, it's wanting to protect your quiet from the noise of the world, then maybe. I've been in love with you for a while now. Alessia inhaled deeply. No tears. Just a quiet release. Like someone had finally untied the knot in her chest after months of waiting. Leonardo picked up the necklace. I chose this because you once told me your mother grew lavender in Amalfi. I wanted a part of your memory. To stay here, he stood, stepping closer. I want you to wear it not because of the contract, but because I want you to stay. With me? She nodded. He gently clasped the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing the warmth of her skin. Their eyes met this time, no rain, no hesitation. The kiss he gave her was not rushed, not uncertain. It was a promise wordless, but true. A soft collision of lips and two hearts finally recognizing each other after months of silence and distance. That night, as she lay in bed, the necklace still cool against her collarbone, the wind whispered through the olive trees beyond. The window? The contract still existed, but the boundary between duty and heart had quietly, irrevocably fallen away. At the end of December, Florence was unexpectedly greeted by an early snowfall. The first flakes of the season fell gently onto the villa's tiled roof, laying a pristine white layer over memories not yet faded. But no amount of snow could soften the ache expanding in Alessia's chest. 4 days ago, Leonardo told her he loved her. 3 days ago, he held her in the brittle lavender garden and whispered promises, clumsy but sincere. 2 days ago, he began calling her name like a prayer knot, Ms. Rossi, not contractual partner. But today, Alessia was packing her bags. She folded her dresses, stacked her books, and left behind the silver lavender pendant in the drawer. She couldn't take it with Herbie, 'cause if she did, she knew she wouldn't be able to walk away. Leonardo wasn't home. He was in Rome, attending a crucial meeting for the expansion of Villa Sol, the same land her father once worked. Now the foundation for a luxury eco-resort. He'd asked her to come with him. She declined. I want to stay and sort out a few things, she'd said, and he believed her. That trust hurt more than doubt ever could. On his desk, she left a letter, short, written in ink as soft as breath. Leonardo, I used to think I came here to repay my father's debt. But over these 6 months, I've realized I've lost more than just my freedom. I gave my heart to someone who never promised to hold it. You've changed. I believe that. But I also believe someone can only truly choose love when they're no longer bound to it. Today, our contract ends. And I'm leaving not because I don't love you, but because I need to know. If nothing held us together, would you still choose me? Don't come after Moinless, you're sure. That afternoon, she left Villa Moretti in the old taxi driven by the housekeeper. No goodbyes, no dramatic parting. Only the soft fall of snow behind her, gentle as farewells from a heart that had both loved and learned it was time to go. 3 days later, Leonardo returned. The villa was unusually silent. No scent of baking. No wool scarves drying on the railing. No classical music echoing from the library. He entered Alessia's room, empty. The bed made. Closets bare. On the table, a letter and the silver necklace. He didn't read the letter right away. He just stood there, gripping the lavender pendant like it might whisper something back to him. Minutes passed before he opened it. Each line, cut like a blade to wounds he'd never truly closed. That night, he didn't eat, didn't sleep. He went to the library, the room where their silences had once felt like home, and sat in the worn leather chair. The letter trembled in his hand. But his eyes fixed on the falling snow outside, the window flakes, soft as ash. For the first time in years, Leonardo couldn't work. He called Bianca. Cancel everything this week. Are you sure, sir? No need to repeat, he said, his voice raw. The next morning, he stepped into his study, opened the safe, pulled out the marriage contract. The paper that had once protected him now felt like a cage. No hesitation, no deliberation. He tore it to pieces. The fragments drifted to the floor like snow falling indoors. It's over, Alessia. No more contracts. No more reasons. Only choice remains. The following day, Leonardo left Florence, driving south along toward Amalfi. Snow thickened as he traveled. Mountain roads wound white and treacherous, tires skimming thin sheets of ice. His headlights glowed faint in the fog, but he didn't slow. He didn't stop near midnight. He arrived in the town. A small cafe still glowed amber beneath a snowy awning. He stepped in, asked the woman behind the counter, "Has Miss Rossi returned here?" The woman nodded and pointed toward a house. By the sea, once her father's winery, now a modest bookshop where Alessia hid from the world. He stood before the house. Snow gathered on his shoulders, in his hair. His heart beat like iron beneath his ribs. He knocked once, then again, inside. Alessia sat by the fire, Il Piccolo Principe resting in her lap, the same book she once said had comforted her as a child. At the sound, her heart lurched, and fear rose together as she opened the door. Leonardo stood there, cold, exhausted. In his hand, torn pieces of the contract that once bound them. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "I miss you." He said just one thing, "I don't need the contract. I only need you." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, without waiting, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in the falling snow. When their lips met again, it wasn't clumsy. It wasn't uncertain. It was two people, two hearts, and one undeniable truth. They had chosen each other. This time, for love. That night, snow continued to fall in steady silence across the wooden roof of the seaside house in Amalfi. Inside, the fire crackled warmly in the hearth as Alessia sat curled beside Leonardo, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of hot cocoa. Her body still trembling, half from the cold, half from the storm inside her. Leonardo sat close, silent. The steel gray in his eyes had softened, no longer forged from ice, but colored with rain and regret. They said nothing for a long time. Only the crackle of burning wood and the wind tapping at the glass reminded them they weren't alone in the world. There were no walls left between them, no masks. The distance that once felt like an ocean had melted in the embrace outside. Beneath the falling snow, Alessia spoke first, her voice raspy with emotion and winter chill. "You really came. I thought maybe you wouldn't." Leonardo turned to her, gently brushing her hair behind her ear. "It took me 3 days to admit I was a coward," he said. "And another 3 hours to tear up the contract. But only 3 seconds to know I had to find you." She let out a soft laugh wet with unshed tears. Fragile and beautiful enough to make his heart ache. "You know," she said, "I didn't leave to punish you. I just needed to be sure that when you chose to stay with me, it was because you wanted to, not because of a piece of paper or pity." "I know," he replied. "And I came here, not to ask you to return to Villa Moretti. I came to ask you not to leave my heart." Alessia's breath caught. Amid the storm, those words became the warmest thing she'd ever known. Silence fell again. Then Leonardo met her gaze fully for the first time, without evasion or fear. "I loved Julia with my youth," he said slowly. "But I love you with everything I have left." Alessia clutched at her sweater. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot against the winter air. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared that if we go on, one day you'll pull away again because of the past, because of guilt, because it's easier to shut the door than leave it open." Leonardo nodded. "I'm scared too, but for the first time I want to learn how to live with fear instead of running from it." From his coat pocket, he drew something smaller, silver ring. Simple, unadorned, no diamonds. just a delicate band etched with a lavender wreath. I'm not kneeling. There are no candles. No roses, he said. But I do have one truth. He took her hand, once the hand that had pushed him away in despair. Now it lay still in his, neither trembling nor resisting. Alessia Rossi, he said, voice husky, you no longer have to be my wife out of duty. But if you want to, if you'll let me, I want to be the man who stands beside you. No end date. No terms. She didn't answer with words. She placed her hand against his chest, where his heart thundered wildly beneath. Nodded, double quotes, yes. She whispered, I will, no contract, just love. That night, they lay together in the warm, modest room. Outside, the wind howled and the sea thrashed against the shore. There were no silk sheets like in Florence. No vintage wine, nothing but a thick blanket. Shared warmth and the purity of something finely whole. Leonardo didn't touch her like a man claiming what was his. He touched her like someone finally allowed to love on, be loved in return. They belonged to each other in that night. No witnesses. No documents, only two hearts, reunited in the stillness of a snow-covered winter. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the little window. Alessia opened her eyes, her head still resting against the solid warmth of Leonardo's chest. The steady thump of his heart pulsed beneath her ear, the rhythm of a new life beginning. Leonardo, she murmured. He replied, eyes still closed. Why me? She asked. There are hundreds of women out there, more beautiful, more polished, more suited to your world. He opened his eyes, turned to her, a tease, and looked at her like he held a truth too deep for words. At first, I didn't plan to choose you, he admitted. I just wanted someone with a clean background, no complications, easy to manage, a perfect contract. He brushed her hair gently and continued. But then I saw a picture of you smiling at a child in the schoolyard. A smile not meant to impress anyone, not calculated, not performative. It reminded me that once the world had something beautiful in it, something kind, something real. His voice cracked slightly. I chose you because I thought you wouldn't change me. But you became the reason I wanted to change. Alessia smiled. She didn't need another confession. Every breath he took, every word he said, was proof enough that real love didn't need grand declarations. It only needed the right person at the right time and a heart brave enough to stay. 1 year later, spring returned in full bloom to Amalfi. The little seaside town woke to the scent of salt on the wind, the soft murmur of waves brushing against the harbor, and golden sunflowers beginning to stretch open across the hills. In the garden behind the old wooden house, once a family winery, Alessia stood before a mirror in a simple white dress with lace at the collar and soft puffed sleeves, dusting a sprig of lavender in her hair. No extravagant gown, no gold-trimmed venue, no violins or imported roses. Just her, a woman who once walked away from a marriage without a heart, now preparing to step into a life built on love. Outside, Leonardo Moretti stood speaking with her father, Alberto. He wore a light gray linen suit, a small lavender bloom tucked into his lapel. His hair was tousled by the sea breeze, and for the first time in many years, his eyes were bright, like every shadow of the past had finally been laid to rest. Alberto held his hand tightly. Thank you, he said, eyes misted, for showing up when it mattered, and for not leaving her again. Leonardo smiled, rare, honest smile. I used to think I wasn't worthy of her, but I've learned. Love doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks for courage. The ceremony took place in the garden where Alessia once played as a child, where her grandmother once planted lavender between rows of sunflowers. White ribbons were gently tied to wooden chairs. Wildflowers rested in glass jars lining the aisle. Friends, family, village children, everyone came with bright, eager eyes. No one spoke of how 1 year ago, Alessia had left Florence in silence. No one mentioned the contract. Today, they saw only a radiant woman walking slowly down a flower-lined path, clutching a bouquet of sunflowers and lavender symbols of strength and healing. Leonardo waited at the end of the aisle. When their eyes met, he nodded not just a signal, but a vow. This time, he would not let her walk alone. As they stood together, a soft breeze lifted her dress, and Alessia looked into the eyes of the man who once made her afraid and then made her believe. There were no formal vows read from a page. They spoke their own. Leonardo squeezed her hands. "I loved you before I knew how to love. You waited for me not with demands, but with quiet grace. Today, I don't promise perfection, but I promise this: I will never walk away from you again." Tears streamed down Alessia's cheeks, but this time they were made of joy. "I used to believe love belonged to other people," she whispered. "I once signed a marriage without a heartbeat, but then I met you, and I learned that love isn't about being protected. It's about being chosen every day by the same person." Applause echoed, carried by the people, the sea breeze, and the beating of two once silent hearts. They kissed. Not for long, but deep enough to reach memory. The reception was held beneath a grapevine trellis, at a long table draped in linen. Homemade tiramisu, red wine, and biscotti baked by Alessia and the village children the week before lined the table. Leonardo stayed by her side, not out of fear of losing her, but because he knew he had finally found home. Later that afternoon, as guests began to drift away, Leonardo pulled her toward the beach behind the garden, the place she used to hide as a child. "I have a wedding gift," he said, handing her an envelope. She opened it. It was a certificate establishing the Amalfi Education Fund in her name, a foundation to support local schools, libraries, and children's programs. "I invested in Villa Sol for business," he said, "but this is for you. So this place isn't just ours. It belongs to every child who once believed in hope." Even in the coldest contracts, Alessia wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as the sea wind rushed past and the golden light stretched over the sand. That night, they returned to their small wooden house, not Villa Moretti. Not a 5-star resort, but a home of their own. Alessia removed the lavender necklace and placed it in a velvet box, beside a copy of the handwritten letter she once left when she walked away. "This," she said softly, "will remind us that once love didn't come easily." Leonardo nodded, placing a kiss on her forehead. "And now it stays, not because we're bound, but because we've learned to choose each other." Outside, the sunflowers began to close as twilight fell. But inside, the lights remained bright, like the hearts of two people who had once been broken, now healed, now whole. The old contract had ended, but a new life had only just begun. Night fell gently, like a silk curtain being drawn over the world. In the small bedroom of the home they now shared after their wedding, Alessia sat quietly before an old wooden mirror. She had just come from the bath, her hair still damp, cascading over her shoulders, her skin carrying the subtle scent of lavender. She wore an ivory nightgown, simple, like her. No makeup, no heels, no attempt at seduction. And yet to Leonardo, she was more breathtaking than any woman who had ever entered his life. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the wooden frame, watching her as if he'd been granted permission to witness something sacred. She turned toward him, her eyes no longer guarded, still carrying a trace of honest nervousness. "I've never before," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Leonardo wasn't surprised. He'd known, and it had never once made him love her less. In truth, it made his feelings for her deeper, more reverent. He stepped closer and sat beside her on the bed. "Alessia," he said gently, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead, "there's no need to rush. Tonight isn't about the physical, It's about what we do. When nothing binds us anymore but love. She smiled on then, reaching out, placed her hand on his. I'm not afraid of what will happen, she whispered. I'm only afraid that I won't be. Beautiful enough? Not right enough for someone like you. Leonardo let out a soft laugh, warm and low. Like a summer evening, you are the most right thing that's ever happened to me, he said. Then he leaned in and kissed her a kiss that was slow and unhurried. Every movement of his lips, every soft touch of his hand felt like the beginning of a carefully written song. He didn't rush. He let her guide each moment. And when she finally nodded, eyes closed only, then did he continue, and they became each other's, not in urgency or instinct, but like to final puzzle. Pieces placed gently into place after a long journey through pain and healing. When it was over, Alessia lay curled against him, her cheek resting on the warmth of his chest. Leonardo ran his fingers gently down her back, as though still unsure this moment was real, that she was truly there, completely, freely, with nothing in between them. Are you all right? He asked, his voice husky, low. She nodded. Oh, more than all right. I feel free. He chuckled quietly. Strange, isn't it? Your first night stand, I'm the one who feels like I've been saved. She tightened her fingers around his hand. Outside, the wind slipped past the rooftop, carrying the scent of damp earth and spring blossoms. But within the room, the world was perfectly still. Alessia closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she no longer needed to dream of a place called home, because home was the breath of the man holding her in his arms, real and finally, without conditions. Thank you for listening to today's story on Snail Story. Perhaps in life, not every relationship that begins with emotion finds its happy ending, but sometimes it's the bonds formed without feeling that quietly lead us to a love that's real. If you enjoy stories that are slow, deep, and filled with emotion, we invite you to support Snail Story by following, sharing, and leaving a comment below. We'll see you again in the next journey, still about love, but told in the way your heart needs to hear.